So, you want to buy an oil tanker. Not a powerboat, not a yacht with a helipad, but respect if that's the next step. A real, crude oil tanker. The kind that's taller than the Empire State Building. That carries 2 million barrels of Saudi crude across the Persian Gulf, and that moves so slowly you could jog alongside it in the water and keep pace for a while before giving up. Here's the thing they don't tell you before you wire the money. The company whose name is painted on the side of that tanker probably doesn't own it. And the owners aren't oil companies. They're Greek families, Japanese banks, Norwegian investors who don't know or care what crude oil does in a refinery. They just want it to go at their own speed, on their own ship. The economics get really interesting in that delineation between the guy who moves the oil and the guy who owns the boat that moves it. And sometimes, a disaster. Today we're going into what it actually costs to own an oil tanker, how the money works, and why this business can turn a guy into a billionaire in 6 months and bury him in debt the following year. Let's do it. The tanker isn't owned by the oil company. Subscribe. Every week I'll tell you who's doing it and whether it's worth investing in hidden businesses you never even thought about. Begin with the physical asset because scale is the first thing that resets your mental model. A VLCC, or a very large crude carrier, the average size of a large-scale oil shipment, carries around 2 million barrels of crude oil. That's a cargo worth $200 million sitting in a steel hull that cost between $80 to $120 million to build. At any given oil price, the ship floats on water. The cargo costs less than the ship, and you, the owner of the tanker, do not own the cargo. You only have the box. A new VLCC costs about $100 to $130 million to build in a South Korean or Chinese shipyard. It has a useful commercial life of some 20 to 25 years. Then it goes on to a breaking beach in Bangladesh or India, is run up at high tide, and cut apart by hand. A big tanker is worth $20 million, $30 million in steel, even as scrap metal. That's the bottom. There's always a floor to the asset. The shipbuilding market is another universe. Prices are not fixed. They depend on the price of steel, the capacity of the yards, and importantly, the state of the shipping market at the time. When the tanker rates are high and everyone wants to order ships, the yards get backed up and the prices go up. When the market crashes, no one is ordering. Yards cut prices to keep the lights on. It's what you're walking into when the market looks like whenever it looks like when delivery happens. The ship you ordered today might be delivered in 2 to 3 years. Ordering and delivery timing mismatch is one of the oldest traps in shipping. Order a fleet at a high rate, take delivery at a collapsed rate, and you have a $100 million asset that is generating revenue that doesn't cover your debt service. It's happened dozens of times in the history of the industry. It will happen again. Tanker owners don't sell oil. They rent out ships. The price they charge is the tanker rate, either as a daily hire rate in dollars per day or on the spot market using a point system known as world scale, which is adjusted for route, distance, and type of cargo. Either way, the question is always the same. What does it cost to move a barrel of oil from point A to point B? And who's paying? The tanker rate market is one of the most volatile commodity markets on the planet. I mean that, literally. There was something really never seen before in 2020, when COVID crushed oil demand, and at the same time Saudi Arabia and Russia decided to go into a price war. VLCC tanker rates reached $300,000 per day, then a little higher. Not that shipping cost more. It was that everyone on Earth was suddenly an oil producer and needed somewhere to park crude that nobody was buying. And the cheapest floating storage was a tanker sitting at anchor. Tankers were being chartered as floating storage at rates which, when annualized, would recover the entire purchase price of the ship in less than a year. Owners with ships in that window made generational money in months. Then the window shut. Rates normalized to 2021. Owners who had locked in long-term charters at those rates continued to draw. Everyone else saw the spike disappear. The flip side is the trough. In bad markets, and tanker markets can get very bad, A VLCC might earn a charter of $10,000 to $15,000 a day. The cost of running a VLCC, just the crew, fuel when it's moving, port costs, insurance, and basic maintenance, is running about $8,000 to $12,000 a day before you touch the debt service on the ship itself. A $10,000 a day charter rate, you're not really making much money, just covering the costs. Include the mortgage, and you are losing money every day that the ship is at sea. That's the basic tension of being a tanker owner. The profits, when they do come, are enormous. The norm is very tight margins, work hard, and you have to be very clear about it. The risk can be the bankruptcy. It rewards patience, perfect timing, and enough capital to survive the bad years until the good years arrive. $300,000 a day for a ship that normally does $15,000. Subscribe to my channel. You know this is always the kind of market where nobody explains to you. You virtually never pay cash for a tanker. The typical structure is 30 to 40% equity and 60 to 70% debt from maritime banks. A $100 million ship could take 30 to 40 million of your own capital and the rest financed against the ship as collateral. In bad markets, when the market value of the ship goes below the loan balance, the bank gets very interested in your balance sheet very quickly. That's where the legal structure is intentionally complex. A major owner of tankers with 30 ships does not own all of them in one company. Each vessel is owned by its own dedicated special purpose vehicle, often registered in Liberia, the Marshall Islands, or Panama, jurisdictions with well-developed maritime law and tax neutrality. If one ship has a problem, is seized, or goes bankrupt, the rest of the fleet is protected. The liability is still with the single ship entity. It isn't a loophole. It is just the way the industry has always worked. The flag state registries exist because this is what shipping owners need. Let's talk about what goes wrong, because the failure modes in tanker ownership are specific and revealing. The classic is being over-leveraged in a downturn. You buy ships when rates are good, and the bank is happy to lend. At the top of the market, 70% debt. Rates drop. Your ship's market value drops. Now you have a $70 million loan on a $50 million vessel, and the charter revenue you are getting is just enough to pay the operating expenses. The bank relaxes loan covenants. They want more equity, or they want the ship. If you can't give them equity, they take the boat. After 2008, when tanker values fell 40% in a year, dozens of shipping companies found themselves in this situation. The geopolitical risk in oil tankers is more specific than in other shipping. Tankers carrying crude oil ply some of the world's most politically sensitive waters: the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, the Strait of Malacca. The capture of a British-flagged tanker in the Strait of Hormuz in 2019 reminded every tanker owner in the world that their $100 million asset traverses a 21-mile wide choke point controlled by a country that has, at various points, used the passage as a geopolitical lever. Environmental regulatory risk is the one that is changing the industry now, and it's the one that most casual observers don't understand. The International Maritime Organization's emissions rules require big cuts in the carbon intensity of the global fleet. Older tankers that have not been retrofitted with scrubbers or converted to run on LNG or methanol are left with costly upgrades or banishment to routes where enforcement is lighter. A tanker that does not satisfy emission standards and cannot call at European ports has lost a lot of commercial value. The stranded asset problem faced by owners of nuclear plants when the rules changed under their investments applies to owners betting on the wrong fuel transition, like owners of LNG-powered vessels who bought into those ships when methanol might become the standard. This is what I always come back to with tankers. The asset is unglamorous in a way that is almost impossible to overstate. A crude oil tanker is a floating pipe. It grabs oil at one place and dumps it somewhere else. No brand. There is no customer loyalty. There is no differentiation in product. Two VLCCs of similar age and spec are functionally equivalent to the operator who is chartering them. The only variable that counts is rate. but families who have learned to trade these assets through multiple market cycles, buying distressed ships nobody wants, running them through the bad years, selling into the booms, have built some of the biggest private fortunes in maritime history. Not with technology, not by innovating. Patience, leverage discipline, and a clear-eyed understanding of a cycle that has repeated in roughly recognizable form for as long as the oil trade has existed. That's business. 30,000-ton steel, 2 million barrels of crude, and somebody, somewhere, figuring out exactly what it costs to move it today. Subscribe. If you liked this, you won't want to miss the next one. It's going to be very interesting and controversial at the same time.